Mara Linton had always been the quiet one on Maple Ridge Lane till the night her name appeared at the center of a police investigation that would expose a chilling truth no one in her neighborhood ever imagined. Mara Linton moved through life with a calm rhythm that rarely wavered. She lived in a small house on the end of a quiet street, surrounded by trimmed hedges and familiar faces. Every morning, she stepped outside just as the sun began to rise, carrying a worn canvas bag filled with lesson plans and snacks for the children in her special needs classroom. Her neighbors often watched her leave, admiring how she always seemed steady and composed. To them, she was someone who valued routine, someone whose days unfolded with predictable order. Her work at the school demanded patience and gentleness, qualities she seemed to possess endlessly. She guided her students through simple tasks, celebrated every small breakthrough, and worked late to prepare activities that could help them learn in ways that made sense to each of their unique needs. Staff members trusted her, parents appreciated her, and students responded to her quiet style. Nothing about her life appeared unstable or unusual. She rarely missed a day, rarely visited places outside her normal routes, and rarely allowed anything unexpected to interfere with her schedule. But beneath the calm surface of her daily life, something had begun to shift months earlier. It started on a gray afternoon when she found an unfamiliar envelope in her mailbox. It wasn't addressed with a name or return address, only a time, handwritten in crooked numbers. Inside was a single photograph of a dimly lit alley she had never seen. She tucked the envelope away, unsure what to make of it. At first, she convinced herself it must have been delivered to the wrong house. She tried to ignore it, pushing it to the back of her mind as she focused on her students and her steady routine. Weeks later, another envelope appeared. This one contained a photograph of a deserted parking lot at night. Again, there was no explanation. She placed it in the same hiding spot as the first. Over the next few months, more envelopes arrived, each containing a picture of a location she didn't recognize, each with a new time written on the outside. None of the images showed people, threats, or anything she could interpret. Still, the pattern unsettled her. She kept the envelopes hidden not because she felt guilty, but because she didn't want anyone to worry. She feared people might misunderstand or assume she was involved in something strange. She reasoned that the letters were probably the result of a mistake or an odd prank. Yet as the pile of envelopes grew, her behavior slowly changed. She became more alert in her own home, pausing to listen for sounds at night. She checked her mailbox more cautiously and looked over her shoulder more often during evening walks. Although she told herself she was overreacting, her instincts tightened around her like a warning she didn't know how to interpret. She continued teaching, smiling through every lesson, but an unseen weight followed her everywhere. Her neighbors noticed small differences. They saw her pause on her front steps, as if thinking through something important. They noticed she closed her curtains earlier than usual and kept her porch lights on longer into the night. Still, no one imagined anything serious. To them, she remained the quiet teacher with a gentle manner and an ordinary life. Only Mara knew her world had begun to shift, though she could not yet explain how or why. Strange patterns began spreading through the neighborhood long before anyone connected them to Mara's quiet home. At first, people simply felt unsettled, without knowing why. Porch lights flickered more often than usual. Dogs barked late into the night for no obvious reason. A few residents started mentioning that their doorbells rang at odd hours, only for them to find no one standing outside. Most blamed technical issues or mischievous teenagers. No one imagined anything more serious. One neighbor, a retired postal worker who liked observing the street from his living room window, noticed that Mara's lights turned on and off at unusual times. Sometimes they glowed brightly well after midnight. Other times, the house sat completely dark, when she should have been home preparing for the next school day. He found it odd because Mara had always followed the same schedule year after year. Her routines were so reliable that neighbors used them to judge their own time of day. Seeing her habits twist so suddenly planted the first seeds of unease. Around the same period, a string of minor thefts began creeping across the neighborhood. Packages disappeared from porches, small garden tools went missing, and bicycles vanished from open garages. These incidents weren't dramatic enough to cause panic, but they were strange enough to make families more cautious. Some installed new security systems, while others added motion lights or kept their blinds closed. Still, The atmosphere on the street continued to shift, almost like a quiet warning. One resident, who had recently set up security cameras, discovered eerie footage while reviewing a missing package. A hooded figure walked past Mara's house repeatedly, always keeping close to fences and shadowed areas. The figure moved slowly and deliberately, avoiding the main sidewalks. Sometimes they paused near her mailbox, as if checking whether something had arrived. The timestamp on every appearance matched late-night hours when the street was usually empty. Although the footage was grainy and the person's face never appeared, the pattern was unsettling. People also began noticing changes in Mara's routines outside her home. She had once driven only during the day, always heading straight to school and returning soon afterward. Now her car moved at unusual times. It left her driveway late at night and returned just minutes later. On some mornings, she looked tired and unfocused, as though she hadn't slept well. A few neighbors wondered whether she had taken on extra responsibilities at work, but the school staff reported nothing different. Meanwhile, rumors slowly drifted among residents, spreading uncertainty. Some thought the neighborhood thief might be someone familiar. Others believed an outsider was responsible. And then, when a missing person report appeared on the community bulletin board, everyone's worry sharpened. The report described someone last seen near one of the strange locations captured in the anonymous photographs hidden inside Mara's closet. Police started reviewing footage from homes around the area. The hooded figure appeared repeatedly near the same houses, especially near Mara's. The officers noticed that the figure's movements always coincided with the nights before Mara's lights behaved strangely or her car shifted positions. Even more concerning, Mara herself was sometimes captured on camera, leaving home at odd hours. She carried nothing but returned holding small objects that didn't match her usual belongings. The police didn't yet know who was responsible or whether Mara was a victim or a participant. But the evidence suggested she was somehow involved, even if unwillingly. The once ordinary neighborhood now felt tense, surrounded by patterns that didn't make sense. Every new detail pointed toward something larger taking shape. And at the center of it, whether she realized it or not, stood the quiet teacher everyone thought they knew. Detectives approached the situation carefully, aware that the growing evidence could easily point in different directions. Their first step was to gather and compare everything they had: camera footage, neighborhood reports, timelines of recent crimes, and the new information from the missing person case. What they found was a complex network of connections that seemed unrelated at first glance, but became more unsettling as they overlapped. Each petty crime in the neighborhood, every break-in, every stolen item, every damaged fence, suckered within hours of a new envelope arriving at Mara's home. The photographs inside those envelopes showed locations that matched the general areas where these crimes happened. Even though Mara had never been seen committing anything illegal, her late-night movements aligned disturbingly well with places tied to the investigations. Detectives questioned whether she had been lured, manipulated, or was somehow participating without realizing how suspicious it appeared. They began with her daily routine. Mara's work schedule provided her with clear boundaries: early mornings at school, afternoons with her students, and evenings spent preparing the next day's materials. Her colleagues had nothing negative to report about her behavior. They described her as focused, gentle, and fully dedicated. But when detectives compared this with the times she left her home unexpectedly, it was clear something had disrupted her usual rhythm. She was venturing out after midnight only to return minutes later. She visited streets she normally never drove through. These disruptions started shortly after the first envelope arrived. Detectives then expanded their search to digital trails. They reviewed her phone records, emails, and recent online activity. Everything looked normal, free of suspicious messages or unexplained contacts. She had no criminal history, no debts, and no known enemies. If she was being threatened or blackmailed, she had left no trace of it. This absence of evidence made detectives even more uneasy. Someone trying to frame her would be careful. Someone trying to use her movements as a shield would leave no strings behind. The GPS data on her car showed short but unusual trips. Each trip lasted only a few minutes, always within the same narrow window of time late at night.
Ow.
These moments coincided with reports of the hooded figure appearing on neighborhood cameras. The possibility formed that the figure might have been watching her leave, following her route, or using her presence to mask their own movements. The timing matched too closely to be dismissed. Detectives also reviewed the missing person case more closely. The person who had vanished had been last seen near a location identical to one of the photographs found in the envelopes. This connection created a new sense of urgency. If the missing person had been taken or targeted near one of the locations sent to Mara, then the envelopes could be part of a larger pattern with dangerous implications. Authorities decided to map every location shown in the envelopes. When placed on a large board, the photographs formed a rough path circling the neighborhood and extending to areas just beyond the town. These spots weren't random. They aligned with recent reports of vandalism, small thefts, and suspicious activity. It looked like someone had carefully chosen each place, marking them in a sequence that only made sense when viewed as a whole. The evidence painted two possible pictures. Either Mara was being guided through the map unknowingly, or someone with access to her life was using her as a convenient cover. Detectives noted how each incident happened only after a new envelope appeared, meaning someone was orchestrating the events with precision. They couldn't yet prove whether Mara was a victim or a pawn, but the pattern showed intention behind every move. With another predicted date approaching, based on the timing of previous envelopes, investigators knew they could no longer wait. They prepared to confront the situation directly, hoping the next step would reveal who truly stood behind the growing chaos. Police arrived at Mara's home just before sunrise. When the neighborhood was still quiet and the sky carried a dull early morning haze, they moved cautiously, aware that any sudden misstep could disrupt the delicate investigation. They had no certainty about what they would find inside the house, only a growing set of connections pointing them toward her front door. The officers positioned themselves carefully, watching the windows, observing the yard, noting every small detail that could become important. Nothing appeared unusual from the outside, yet beneath the calm exterior, they sensed tension building. When Mara opened the door, she appeared confused, as though she had been interrupted in the middle of her morning routine. Her face showed exhaustion, the kind that comes from weeks of stress, rather than a single sleepless night. Behind her, the hallway was dimly lit, and the air inside the house felt heavy. Officers immediately noticed a stack of envelopes on a small table near the door, ranged neatly as if she had been examining them shortly before the knock. Their familiar, unmarked appearance was unmistakable. Once inside, investigators searched the house systematically. They moved through each room, documenting everything. Mara cooperated fully, though her uneasiness was evident in her trembling hands and uncertain posture. Her living room was clean and organized, with teaching materials stacked in careful piles. Her bedroom looked simple and undisturbed, showing no signs of sudden packing or hidden belongings. Yet deeper inside the house, in a quiet back room she rarely used, they found what they had anticipated, the full collection of envelopes she had been hiding for months. The envelopes were stored inside a large box pushed against the far wall. They were arranged in chronological order, each containing a photograph matching one of the unusual locations connected to the crimes. Some images had faint creases from being handled repeatedly, while others looked untouched. The officers documented each one, noting the consistent handwriting on the exterior. These envelopes formed a timeline and eerie guide that matched the sequence of neighborhood incidents exactly. The most unsettling discovery came from a locked drawer in Mara's desk. Inside lay a notebook filled with coded lists. The lists contained dates, times, and short, cryptic references that corresponded to the same nights her car was seen leaving home. The notebook wasn't neatly organized. It looked like something written under pressure, with shaky lines and hurried entries. To investigators, this suggested someone had been directing her actions, though the clues were too vague to determine whether she had followed them willingly or under threat. As officers continued searching, they uncovered a small but critical piece of evidence outside the home. Attached to the underside of her mailbox was a GPS tracker, skillfully taped in place. Its battery was still active, and its placement indicated deliberate planning. Whoever had attached it wanted to know exactly when the mailbox was opened, ensuring precise timing for every envelope delivery. This detail complicated the situation further. If Mara was aware of the tracker, it pointed toward involvement. If she wasn't, it pointed toward a hidden manipulator controlling the sequence from a distance. Standing in her doorway, confronted with the officers, Mara looked more overwhelmed than defiant. Her confusion didn't appear staged, and her body language suggested fear rather than guilt. Still, investigators couldn't jump to conclusions. They needed concrete proof before deciding whether she was a target or a participant. Everything inside the home deepened the mystery. Each clue confirmed the existence of a larger plan. Whether Mara was at its center by choice or by force remained uncertain. But the officers knew they were close to uncovering the truth behind the strange events that had unsettled the entire neighborhood. For several days after the search, investigators focused on analyzing the physical evidence collected from Mara's home. They ran fingerprints from every envelope, photograph, and item found in the locked drawer. They examined the notebook for handwriting matches. They checked the GPS tracker for any serial numbers or clues about where it had been purchased. While they worked, the neighborhood whispered theories, trying to understand how a quiet teacher had become linked to a sequence of crimes. No one knew what to believe, and the uncertainty left everyone on edge. The forensic team eventually returned the first major breakthrough. None of the fingerprints on the envelopes matched Mara. Every clean print belonged to another individual, former coworker who had resigned from the school months earlier. His departure had been explained as a personal matter, but investigators soon uncovered a more complicated history. He had once been disciplined for inappropriate boundary violations with staff, though details had been kept private for the sake of workplace discretion. Furthermore, there were sealed records from years before showing he had been involved in a stalking case in another town. This information reframed the entire situation. As detectives dug deeper into his background, they discovered he had been living under increasingly unstable circumstances since leaving the school. He had no stable residence, frequently changed jobs, and drifted between temporary addresses on the outskirts of town. His sudden disappearance coincided with the first envelope Mara received. The more investigators compared timelines, the more apparent it became that he had carefully planned the sequence of events, using Mara's predictable routine as a tool. When questioned about her former coworker, Mara recalled only vague interactions. He had been polite, reserved, and overly observant. He sometimes lingered near her classroom longer than necessary, offering to help with tasks she hadn't requested. She had never considered these behaviors alarming, dismissing them as attempts to be friendly. She had no idea he had been monitoring her closely enough to learn her schedule, habits, and vulnerabilities. Realizing this left her shaken. Police mapped the location of every photograph in the envelopes again, this time cross-referencing them with sightings of her former coworker. The pattern shifted. Instead of forming a path meant for her, the locations marked places where he had been observed or where minor crimes had occurred near his last known whereabouts. He had used her as a distraction, sending her to the general area of each event so her movements would cloud the timeline. If authorities reviewed camera footage or GPS data, she would appear to be the one near the crime scenes, not him. The missing person case strengthened the conclusion. Evidence recovered near the last known location of the missing individual included items linked directly to the former coworker. He had been using the outskirts of town as a temporary hideout, moving frequently enough to avoid detection. When investigators followed these leads, they eventually located an abandoned storage structure containing stolen property, discarded clothing, and personal effects belonging to the missing person. This discovery tied him conclusively to multiple incidents. The final confirmation came when officers tracked him to an isolated property far beyond residential roads. The site showed signs of long-term concealment. Inside, investigators found more stolen items, a second collection of photographs, and surveillance notes about Mara's schedule. He had documented her routines in detailed lists, proving she had been monitored for months without realizing it. His intention appeared clear. He had wanted to shift suspicion away from himself by directing attention onto her. Once the suspect was taken into custody, the remaining pieces fell into place. His behavior fit the profile of someone seeking control through manipulation and misdirection. Investigators concluded that Mara had been targeted specifically because of her quiet nature, reliable schedule, and lack of close personal ties. She was the perfect person to frame visible enough to be noticed, but private enough not to raise immediate alarm. In the weeks that followed, Mara's life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. The envelopes were removed from her home, the GPS tracker was taken as evidence, and the coded notebook was no longer on her desk. Though her sense of safety had been shaken, she was eventually cleared of all suspicion. The community, once uneasy and confused, began to understand the extent of the deception that had unfolded around them. What had seemed like the unraveling of a quiet teacher's life was, in truth, the exposure of a hidden orchestrator working from the shadows. The unraveling of the mystery revealed not guilt, but the resilience of someone unknowingly placed at the center of another person's secret and dangerous plan.